Okay. Okay. So, right. So today we're going to talk about some lighting strategies, and by that I mean we're going to talk through. We're actually going to use the Rhino lights. So I've been using. Last week I was, trying to flip back and forth in between the two, and you saw my computer struggle with that. And honestly, today I opened up my V-Ray and it didn't want to. The entire background was black, and it was just kind of like, you know what? We'll just stick to Enscape today, and Enscape seems to be working fine. So if you are using V-Ray, what I'll do is I'll actually walk through using what I think is a nice medium in between the two, which is you can do lighting for V-Ray with the same Rhino lights that also work for Enscape or for any of the render engines that are plugins. So I'll just talk through Rhino lighting, and then after that we'll do our break, hopefully 3:30 and maybe 3:45 at this point, and then we'll talk through the second half of class will be the materials and how to map those, add some bump maps, um, and how we can do some in-house color manipulation on them. We don't have to Photoshop them. We can just use some of the settings in here to uh, change those colors and saturation and all that. So, um, all right, so I'm going to get started. Right, and I'll pull up my. Oh yeah. See my deck. I didn't get to finish my mapping this morning, so my my deck is all wild. But there's some brick now, some intent there for brick, and then in here we have this is where you use your scenes. Okay, so oh yeah, and they changed those. Okay, and now I have to adjust my lights because you don't see them. I just changed the color of these from white to black, and now my lights don't want to show in the same in, with the same intensity, probably because they're getting absorbed. So have to adjust those. But you can see that I've added a few lighting strategies to this tiny cabin. If you look here, you can see that I have some soffit lighting. So I added a soffit here. And then over here, I added a tiny cove. Okay, so a linear cove. And then I have my pendant lights hanging here with lights that you cannot see. And I'm not sure it would even help. Oh, there we go. Okay, just need to turn those up a little. So I have my pendant lights with some point lights inside of them, and then I've cheated because I had a cone light, but I wasn't getting a good enough penumbra. It wasn't reflecting off of my sides wide enough, so I cheated and I added a point light, so it has the appearance of that. But it's a combination then between point light and cone, so that I can, if I change this to time of day, you can start to see that I'm getting some reflection from those lights on that surface. Okay, and it's the same thing across the space. You can start to see how that starts to change, right? You notice I went from daytime where everything looks pretty normal. It looks you know, fairly good. I would say even these lights could be a little bit brighter too. As I start to bring that sun down, everything starts to look relatively um, gosh, and it's over contrast. So um, for Enscapers, a quick adjustment, if you want to do a night render and you have the same lights on, you can go in here and you can adjust, go to atmosphere, and you can use this slider, this artificial brightness slider, and start to adjust these, okay, to bring that lighting down to a normal level. If you get them generally to a good state, okay, then you can also, oh, what am I doing? Wrong slider. Um, generally to a good state, then we can start to go over here and adjust them one by one if we have certain lights that are a little too bright and others that are too dark, right? We can start to work through what is the intensity. Okay, so you can see my list these are my list of lights that are in my scene. This is what we'll be building. Okay, so come on, go back there. This is what we'll be building. Notice I stopped labeling things properly. So you can't see exactly which light is where. But these, you can see at least the names of them, right? It'll tell you the direction of the light. So the lights I have placed in the scene, I have a point light. That's weird. Okay. I have a point light, I have spotlights, and I have linear lights, and that's it. So I have three different types of lights in my scene, and I generally get a pretty nice glow from all of them, and they look, as they should in real life. So the point light I used in my cans, okay, my can lighting. Then I have my linear light up here in the cove lighting, and then I have a spotlight in my pendant lighting. And I wanted to show what these are in case we haven't noticed them, seen them before, whatever. So let's just talk about what these lighting strategies are in general, right? So in lighting world, you have a couple of uh, architectural lighting strategies that you can use usually in residential or hospitality locations or whatever. You can use bars, but it's uh, this this one in particular is called a cove light, and you have a light and it's hidden behind, it's screened right behind a kind of horizontal surface and then a vertical surface, and then that light emits up and it reflects on the ceiling above. Okay, so in our scene, then that's this guy. I have a linear light hidden in here, and I'm saying that he's reflecting on the surface above. The can lighting then, the can lighting is what you'll see quite often in above kitchens, maybe in like a den or something like that. We turn on here soft, like this one because I had both in the same image. But you can see how it has the cove lighting above, and then there's these can lights that are dotted along that same surface, right? That same soffit. Or you can also align your space with them to lead people into the space. Um, Sometimes they're used in nooks, if you have a seating nook or something. But they're different strategies than just a light fixture, and then the light source comes from that fixture, right? This is more like an architectural element that you have integrated into your design. Okay, and then of course there's our pendant lights. So I tried to pick the three that I think are probably the most popular and that you'll probably create more frequently. So let's get started. I'm going to stop my render view, and first I think we'll start with the can lighting. So how to do can lighting in a soffit like that. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my layers, make this large, I'm not distracted, and turn off my deck, which I was material mapping, so I don't want to see that awful map just now. Also turn off my interior because, nope, I want to turn off that, okay? Because all I want to see are my lights, my lighting strategies. I might actually make this a little bit, there we go. Okay. So this is kind of the behind the scenes, right? We can start to see these lights actually in Rhino space. There's my cone light. Up here, this is going to be my, oh, I have to lock that, I do. Up here, this is my pendant light. We don't want the pendant light. But I'm going to have my spotlight in there. It's going to be locked the layer below it, so I might want to up that so I can lock the pendant. And then I can go back and select my lights. Right, so I have my spotlight, or I have my spotlight here with the cone, and then these are my point lights. Then over here for my can lights, those are the point lights just hidden in my cans. Okay, so how do I do this? I need to first have some recess for the light, right? So a light is the source, and just like the sun, right, we want to block it. We want to block the direct light. We just want the indirect light to shine across a surface or to emit from a point, the point source, but we don't want to see the point source exactly because we very rarely see the point source in real life, right? Our goal, and that's because it's harsh, right? We don't want to look directly into the light, just like you wouldn't look directly into the sun. So you want to hide that source in something. So you want some soffit or some pendant, or you could have a floor lamp or some other fixture that you're working with that you're hiding a point source in. And these were stolen from not stolen, but I downloaded them from the warehouse. So I brought them in here, kind of monkeyed with them to get them to hang the right level. But they, I could have modeled these too, and you can as well. You can, if you want a particular light or you want to make up your own fixture, you can do that. All these are just simple geometry, just like any other geometry in our Rhino space that we can add materials to and turn off and on and whatever. So for here, for instance, I built up my own soffit, and I created a box. So I picked my box over here, and in my space, so if I turn off my soffit and I kind of, actually I could probably turn off all of this and create a new layer and just call this like testing or something. Okay, I could probably turn off my lights. Okay, and everything's blank. Cool, okay. All right, so let's do this again. So I'm going to call this layer soffit. Let's make this current. I'm going to pick a box from over here, and I'm going to use the top of my wall, which I can move down later, but that means I have a clear point selected in my Rhino space to work from. Okay, so it's working from this interior corner. I then wanted to bring this over as to align with I have my stove, right, for my interior. So wherever you want that soffit to end, you probably want to extend it. You don't want to have it behind here. You could, it'd be a little strange because you want that light. You want to use the soffit to hide the light, which you're going to use as your working space. So you probably want that lighting to be somewhere over the sink, but here, which means it's probably going to end up that the center line of the soffit is going to control the size of this. Okay, so I'm going to select just a point there because I know it's going to work in planar space. And then for a height, I'm going to say it's like 3 feet or something, because what I wanted to do is I wanted that surface to sink into my ceiling. If it does that, then I can use the ceiling as a trimming piece, trimming element. So if I go over to my front view, I can shift this off and down, bring it into the space. Maybe say it aligns with the door, right? Should align with the door, and then the rest of it overhangs here, so that when I turn off or I unlock this, I have my roof. Okay, so now I can select that roof. I can type in trim, select object to trim, and I can select that soffit. Okay, and I think even still exists. Oh, is that right? Yes. Yeah, it's fine. Yes. Okay, great. Looks good. So it's the roof has trimmed off the rest of what was that box. Now I can press escape, go back and lock my box, and then go to my soffit again and start to add those can lighting um, holes, right? They're really just recesses made by cylinders. So I could make a cylinder, right? I could go over here and I could make a cylinder. However, I'm going to do it. I usually do like circles first. I do curves, and then I can get those curves in place, and then I decide the height. I don't like having to decide the height while I'm doing the whole thing. I guess I don't know. I'd rather just decide the circumference, then work from there. Okay, so now to place these circles, right? I'm going to place a circle of the cylinder um, somewhere uh, on this soffit. So I can turn off my interior geometry and I go to my top layer. I can select the midpoint here. I can choose my diameter, say 6 inches, and then I can type in move and shift that over so that it is centered on that box. Okay. Now we probably are working in the wrong plane. Yes, we are. So we might have to move that down. Okay, so move again. This time I'm going to move from this midpoint to this midpoint so that it intersects this bottom surface. There we go. Okay, that looks good. Okay, so now if I go into my top view, I can duplicate this, so I can create all of these extrusions at once. I'm going to hold Alt to copy this and use my gumball to pick the direction. So I'm going to pick, say, I'm going to move in the positive Y direction for 4 feet. And then I'm going to take the same one selected, click that same arrow, hold Alt, and type in -8. Okay, so I now have all 3. Okay, I'm holding Shift to select all of those. I go back into my perspective view and I can extrude these. Extrude curve. Okay, and I want to extrude, I think, you can see why I wanted to do all of them at once, so I wanted to wait to do my extrusion recess. I think I'm going to stick with the 6 inches I think I did before, because those are kind of just tiny little, yeah, they're perfect, they're fine. Okay, and then delete the original curve, and then I can select these, I'll cap them, and then I'm going to type in Boolean difference. Boolean difference will, well, it's going to ask me the surfaces that I want to subtract from. So I'm going to select the soffit that I made, press enter, and then it's going to ask me which ones I want to subtract with. And I want to select my little cylinders here. And it'll ask me, do I want to delete input? It should be set to yes. I want to delete that because what it will do is it will create that void that we want. Okay, and it'll create a capped void too. Okay, so you can see that it has a surface at the bottom of it, and there's some, there's surface all around. So that's great. When we put our light in there, it'll be hidden, but the light source will emit out. Okay, so that's the can recesses. So now I need to add another layer and to call these my can lights. Double click that, lock my soffit. Okay, everything else is good. Do I need to lock anything? No. Okay. All right, so now we can go to our lighting. And we can use this standard toolbar, and we can use these lighting buttons, right? The drop down buttons here, or we can go to render tools and then we have our panel available to us here. It doesn't matter, they're all the same. And the key ones that we're working with today are just the spotlight, point light, either rectangle or linear. We're going to look at both of those. And then the rest of these are, more controls. The directional light is for directional light, and you can play with that if you want, but I find it the least useful, so I am not going to talk about it. And then if you're working in V-Ray space, so in your toolbar here, you will be working with this drop-down menu. Okay, so you have the similar lights, right? You have a rectangle light tool, sphere light tool, which is going to be your point light. Rectangle light is here. You have your spotlight, which is here. This is an IES light. You can ignore that for now. It works like a spotlight, but you would require an additional file that would be found on, say, a manufacturer's website, so you don't really need that. And then, oh, sorry, this is your point light. What is this one? I don't use sphere light tool, right? Right, it creates a sphere of light. I forgot that. Yeah, that one's actually pretty cool because it creates an actual sphere, and you can see the sphere. You can turn it off too, but it's a little different from a point light tool in that the point light is an actual, just a little point, and it is emitting from this location, but you don't really see it, versus an entire globe, illuminated globe. And then these other 4 we're not going to really discuss today, but if you want to, you can play with them. The dome light, you're going to need, again, additional file for that's going to kind of create a new sun environment for you. So it's maybe a little bit more advanced, but you're welcome to test it out and see what you can find. Convert to mesh light and sun creation, right? The directional light tool. These are again not really frequently used, so I would say we're going to stick to these 4. Okay, so at least I should say I don't frequently use them. Maybe you will. I don't know. You'll find a good use for them. But I usually stick, especially for interiors, right? We're just focusing on placing these interior lights. And actually, if you're in V-Ray, you can use you don't have to use these. You can use these Rhino lights as well. They'll create a light in your V-Ray editor. So under light here, notice all of these lights that I have, they're from my Rhino lighting placement. So it doesn't, we'll have the same controls for either. It's the same. Okay, so I'm on my can light layer. What I want to do is I want to grab a point light from this menu. So this point light here. It'll ask me the point light location. Okay, so I want to go in here and I want to make sure that in my O snap that I have my center point selected so that when I hover over this cylinder that it snaps to that cylinder center. Okay, so that way I can just place that here, or maybe not, it won't let me. There we go. Okay, um, so I can just place that in the center of my can light, and now I can click render and see how that looks. Um, so a good strategy to have is that every time you're placing a light, so a new light, you go back and you make sure that's rendering properly before you start copying it. And we'll talk about the benefits of copying in a second. So I'm going to just press start and we'll see how this updates. I didn't have that brick on this morning, so we'll see how the lighting looks now. Starting Enscape, okay, let that think. Oh, sorry. I love it when you drink water and then, of course, it goes right down the wrong pipe, and then you have to speak. Okay, all right, so we can see what this point light does for us. Um, so notice I had clicked the exact center of the cylinder, and now we see how that placement occurs in the render. So notice how it's overshooting the that cylinder. Right. I might have to get another drink of water. Um, okay, so you can see that it's overshooting that cylinder. And now what that's telling me is that sphere, that point light, it works like a sphere, in that it has 360 degrees of light. So it's literally just a little point of sparkling light. Um, and since it's working in all directions, what's happening is it's actually the surface, it's catching the surface around the cylinder. So this bottom soffit surface, it's too low. It's starting to reflect around that can light rather than in the can light. Right. So if you look at can lighting, that light is recessed. Um, it's usually some sort of white dot in the ceiling with sort of diffused light below. So if we take a look at this, we can just try shifting this up. Let's see how that looks. Shift it up a few inches. Just use your gumball. See how that looks. Okay. Oh, have to set your live updates to true. Okay, so that kind of helped. That kind of fixed it. I notice we now have this accent against the wall, which is probably pretty good, pretty accurate. It can be solved with if this is a little too much for us, um, we can go into the lighting tab here. So if you don't see this lighting tab of all your lights in the scene, you should be able to go to your options and then go to lights and just check that. And then you'll see this interface. So you can see we have the sun, we have the skylight, both these things we set up before. And now we have unnamed, and unnamed is going to be this new light that we've just added. Um, you can see that the is a point light, and then it also has an intensity level. So it's going to be the strength of that light. If I want to adjust that light, I can double click in this and adjust that. So I can give that half the light intensity. Um, and then I have to press enter. I always forget that. Press enter. Okay, and so now we can see how that appears. So it's a lot weaker, right? Um, in Enscape, so we had our artificial brightness. I might want to make sure that this is set to 100 so that right now that I'm talking about this, talking through this, and then if I were to go over to V-Ray, these settings would be quite intense if I have my art, if I've been using Enscape as my renderer and setting all my lights and their intensity, and then the whole time I was actually working on a false premise, and they were at 30% of their actual um, render intensity. So then I bring it into V-Ray, and then poof, I have a lot of bright light. So so I would want to work on artificial brightness being at 100%, and then as I go into a night render, that changes. That might become a little bit uh, d d dimmer, dimmer. There we go. It might become a little bit dimmer in that um, those lights are now everything that's lighting the space. They don't have the challenge of this is right now working with the sun, and it has to light up just as much as the sun. So it has to be a little bit more intense for us to see it. And then, of course, as the sun goes down and this becomes the only light, well, then it seems brighter. So, um, okay, so that's the placing of one simple point light. Another thing that we can do is we can go to our properties menu, and so you'll see the object uh, tab, right? And you'll see the light tab. So this is another way to work with that lighting intensity. So if I don't like the interface of this lights over here, I can go into this and start to adjust these settings, okay, with a slider. I also have my color attribute. So if I want a warmer light, I can change this, to say a yellow and start to make that a slightly warmer light. Okay, you don't want it too yellow because that'll kind of look a little weird, um, but just slightly yellow, and it kind of it makes it a little bit warmer. Um, units, we don't have to worry about those too much. Usually scalar is fine, though if you wanted to say you have a particular lumen uh, power that you need to meet, right? There's usually a certain lumens, a minimum lumens that you need for a space to be lit in, say, commercial design. So if you need to make sure that you're getting enough lumens, you can change the settings so that this is now lumens, and you understanding what those values are. Okay, but if you just want light in your render, then you can keep that at scalar. Okay, so I think we're good for our point light. If you are V-Rayer, then we can take a look at this. So you notice it's not a point light in V-Ray, it's an Omni light. So we see our Omni lights, and these are previous Omni lights that I have, and right now they should be turned off they're turned off in my view over here. So um, we also have the ability to turn these off um, using just this little slider, right? So we can turn these off and on with this interface. We also have the color and the intensity here as well. Notice they match our Rhino space. As I was saying, you don't have to necessarily use the OmniLight from that drop-down menu interface. You can use the Rhino lights as well. It's not a big deal. I think the rest of these, I don't really play with these too much. So we could focus on decay. So that's kind of the fall off of from the light source and out. But I think we don't need to focus on that too much. I think this should be sufficient, especially since if we're just using it for this, we're getting the effect we need. Um, so I think that, there's not much of the difference for a point light for V-Ray. So I think what we can do then is we can go in here and we can start to copy this over and see what that does. So I'm going to hold this. I'm going to do the same thing I did before for these cylinders. And just select this, hold Shift, or sorry, hold Alt, and then select -4, right? Because I knew that it was 4 feet, and -4 again, so that I have now 3 lights, and they're all aligned in their separate cylinders. Okay. If I look at my light interface, my drop down menu here, you can see that they're all at the same color and they're all at the same intensity, and that's because they're all related. So they're all related in a way that if I select this one and I change this value, it will change that value for all of those copied lights. Okay, same thing goes for our white light, right? If I wanted to adjust that, I can adjust that here and it changes it for all of those copied lights. So know that if you're, you're working and you're just quickly placing point lights all over, you don't have to be so careful because you do have this nice feature in Rhino where that will just change them all for you. Of course, if you don't want them at the same levels, well, then you're going to have to figure out which one is which and then go back, select your, press enter, that's why I wasn't updating. You're going to have to go back, select that light, go to the properties menu and select make new, make unique. Okay, if it make it unique, now if I start to adjust the slider, it's going to work on its own, right? It's no longer related to these other ones. He's a special. Okay. So undo that because I actually do want them to be, yeah, I want them all to be related. I can also use this and select instances too, because that's what this is doing. When I copied them, I created multiple instances of the same light. So it's nice that I can go back and if I placed a whole bunch, I can just go back and select instances and now I have them all selected. Okay, so that is can lighting. All right, so you'll notice that now we're going to jump over to our pendant lights. And pendant lights are kind of similar. So I'm going to duplicate that layer. Right click, duplicate layer and objects, move this down to my testing, 1, 2, 3. Okay. All right, so notice I have some material placed on here. Maybe I should take that off. Maybe I should adjust this back to default. I liked the big hanging black lights. Oh, and this is another quirk I've had happen so many times. If I change material, and it I wait a few seconds, I think it's going to update, never does. You actually have to restart Enscape to get that material updated sometimes. So kind of annoying that I have to keep redoing it. Okay, all right, well, we can work with black. I'm not going to restart. Okay, so for pendant lighting, it's kind of a similar concept, right? Where we really wanted to see the source of that light, but we don't want to see it directly. We want to see the indirect source of that light. And by that I mean we want to see these white circles of like almost discs at the bottom of the light source that show us that the lights are on, right? So if they're off, then we still have the appearance that there are lights, uh, but they're just they aren't on. So um, we want to show that the lighting is on and that it's a feature of the space. So that little disc shows us that. So for this, um, let's first try just placing those spotlights. So I'm going to have my pendant lights copy. Okay, I need a new layer. I'm going to call these my spotlights. Double click, lock these. Okay. And now I'm going to go back over to this menu and I'll select the Create Spotlight. The first prompt is going to be base of cone. And that's going to be the base diameter, right, of the cone, the spotlight cone. So it's kind of the target disk. Okay, so I want that to be the same diameter as my light fixture. So I'm going to select the midpoint of my light fixture and then try to select um, the base of that to be about the same. Okay, so we're going to try that and see how that works. Okay, now it's going to ask me where pretty much where the target or the source light is. So that was my target, you know, disk. And now I want to probably go to my front view so I have an orthographic view and hold shift and then place my source up, probably a foot and a half or something. Okay, so notice it selected when I created that first base disk, it created it at the top of where all of my intersections are, which probably is the clearest midpoint, which makes sense. But that also made my light way too high. So I can just use my gumball here and bring this down to approximate the location of where I think that source light should be. Okay, maybe it's a little bit lower. I'm assuming that there's some uh, light bulb in here that is probably, I don't know, that location. I could probably move it a little bit lower, um, but that's going to be the source of the cone light that's coming out of this. And notice, look how bright that is. It's not bright at all. We can't even see anything. Is there a light in there? No. Okay. So let's figure this out. What's happening? All right, let's look over at this guy. You can see that it has a spotlight. All right. We're not seeing any source. Okay. What about on the floor? I bet if we look at the floor, maybe we'll see something. We'd have to adjust our sun. Nope, still not seeing anything. All right, let's take a look. What's happening in my actual Rhino model? Okay, I have my spotlight here. Things seem to be okay. You know what? It's probably just a little too short. Hmm. Doesn't want to show up. Hmm. I need to change this angle. This view setting it's so small that my little viewport, so it's frustrating to move about. Okay, that's better. I can at least see what I'm working on. Okay, so something's happening here, but I don't know why. A good test is to just keep shifting this guy down. Spotlights, you're on, off, on, off. What if we try the time of day? Hmm. Maybe I have it off somewhere? Well, golly gee, love showing you something and then it doesn't work. Um, let's try to make a different one. Okay, so we'll go back here, go to Spotlight, try it again. Base of cone. Alright, so we're in the top view and try a different one. I'm going to make my cone even larger. The weird thing is it was working above, right? It was working up here, so I know it's on. But it didn't want to work inside the light. I wonder if I turn on my interior, if we'll see that on the counter. Yeah, we see it on the counter. I think he's just too short. So the the cone, you see how it's showing up on the counter here? I think the cone is too short. Um, Needs to be longer. Yep. So so usually I go into so sorry, I should probably explain. So I usually I go into V-Ray at this point, and I use the spotlight editor here, where I start to adjust the cone angle and the penumbra, and I can start to control it that way. But I don't actually use the render the spotlight in the Rhino world much, so um, I still get confused as to how you control the length of that. So it looks like I need this to be the I need to actually make this as long as I want for like the depth. So if I wanted to reach that far, I have to quite literally change that gumball or change that length so that it disperses over the space. And I bet if I turn off this interior now, maybe if you're, huh, so I wanted to see it on the floor, but I'm not seeing anything. I just find that super weird. I guess you're just not close enough. Hmm. Okay, all right. I don't want to waste too much time on getting stuck in this. At least it's working. I was concerned it wasn't even um, updating in my Rhino or my Enscape scene. I was like, do I have to stop and start every single time? Um, but no. Okay. So I'm gonna keep that wider disc one. Um, and then I think we can actually look at the spotlight over here. Yeah, if we go to the properties, these have the same sort of uh, angle and everything. So we can look at the cone angle. Of course, the color and intensity are always there. So those are always available, in either menu. But um, but yeah, these have the same thing as the V-ray space where we have the cone angle and we have the penumbra angle. So if you're in V-ray, it's these guys, right? The cone angle and the penumbra angle. And I don't know if you saw that as I was adjusting this, it was starting to widen the diameter of that circle, and then as I start to bring it out even more, it starts to should start to. Oh my goodness. Oh, that's why it's too low. There we go. Um, it's like that. That would really be weird. Okay, so it needs to be in the actual light shade itself in order to see this. So this was actually it was too low. I had when I was playing with it, I had moved it too far down, so you can see that the source is too low in the shade, um, and that the target is where I need it, so it's pointing at the counter. Um, which seems to reflect just fine, but my floor doesn't want to. So I don't, maybe my floor settings are strange. But then notice as I shift this up more deeper into the lampshade, and of course where I had it, set originally as like the target, as the light source, say that light bulb, now it's starting to reflect off the sides of that lampshade and make it look like it's an actual light, um, you know, recessed in there, and it's actually shining on the surface. So, I probably want to turn that down a little bit. Maybe that's a little too much. Um, okay. We want to see a little bit of that disc. Okay. Maybe shift it down a little bit more. But the goal is to get a similar, um, so I'm going to mess with these, and that's going to be the goal of getting, okay, I have the target is being hit, but the source, the light source, I don't know if it's emitting quite as clear as I'd like it to. So I can adjust this penumbra and cone angle to try to get it to widen that what's kind of an umbrella of light. So in here, I think this is even better so that we can actually see it. So if we bring these way down, we can visualize this. Okay, so you can see here how it's a tiny little dot, and it's really like imagine you have your light source and then your target, and your target is like 16 inches wide. Okay, and it's starting, that's all the diameter it is. Well, it's 16 degrees actually, but just imagine that it's, this tiny little circle that it's creating from a very tiny degree. And then you start to widen that cone, that angle, it's going to start to widen or enlarge that disk so that you have some control at least over how accurate it looks. So if you get too large, then it doesn't look appropriate, right? Because usually a light like this is probably going to be around something around this, right? It's going to hit the edge of this, and then it's going to be a pretty direct line from the edge of this down onto the surface. Okay, it might have a little bit of enlargement from this point to this point, but it's probably going to be somewhere around this. Any larger and it would look a little, questionable, and any smaller, I think it'd look kind of silly. So, see my light intensity. There you go, 80. Okay, and then we also have the penumbra angle. So the penumbra angle right now I have it at 0. As I start to enlarge this, that also enlarges that disk. Okay, but if we look at what's happening in this is a little viewer here, you can see a little bit of as to what a penumbra is, and that's kind of the just like the light point has the 360 degrees. This is kind of creating arcs to the edge of the cone, right? The cone has straight lines usually, and then the penumbra starts to kind of bend those out, which means that it adds like a horizontal uh, vector to those cone usually straight lines. Okay, and what that does for us is it starts to um, pull those lines out and hit the edge of our pendant piece or whatever lampshade we have. So we can start to adjust these and start to really pull that out. And you can see how that horizontal light starts to get um, refracted off of the inside of that light fixture. Okay, and there we can, oop, too much. 90 was okay for the source. Oop, 90. Light 90 might be okay for the source, but I think the intensity here is pretty, it's a little much. So, and we can also reduce our cone angle now, right? Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It's kind of limited. So that's why I did the two for, because what I wanted, right? So I get that effect here, but then my target is no longer accurate. And I'd rather use the spotlight as a control for my target light, and then I'm going to use a point light to create another source. That's what I think. I think it's probably the best choice. So does that make sense? You just saw how I was trying to like once I got this to the penumbra angle and I got that horizontal vector placed where I wanted it, it still wasn't it had created too large of a target light disk, and then also it was too bright, and I don't have the you know faculties to adjust that anymore. I can't change that disk, so I'd rather do it so I'm going to twofold, sorry, where I have one light, my spotlight, that's going to act as my light target. So I want to see that light on the surface, and then I'm going to add a point light that's going to act just like my can light, right? It's the same strategy, and then that will give me the that that source where it says my light is on. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to create that point light here. Select point light. Now I need to go back and do this again. Select location, it's going to create at the top of the light, way up there, yeah. So I'm going to take that light and shift it down. Just place it right in the middle, and there we go. Now we're starting to get the the source light that we want. Okay, and I'm going to shift it down so much as I can start to use that 360 degrees as a kind of, you know, notice it's starting to do the same thing. So I might want to to work with this a little bit more, so that there we go. So that way it looks on, and I have my target source. I kind of want to, I don't want it to make it as bright as these guys, but I want there to be some um, clear light source in there. So I think that's reading. Any brighter in my, I'm gonna have to start to adjust that spotlight again. 75. Okay. All right, we can leave that there for now. But okay, so that's the combination of those. So I'm going to select both of these together, and then I can hold Shift to do that, right? And then I'm just going to hold Alt and drag these because I don't remember what I spaced these at. So that was my bad. I should have paid attention to it, but I did not. So I'm going to hold Alt again, Shift down, and copy these so that I now have 3 of these cone lights and 3 of these point lights all in the same fixture. That way they all match. Okay. Again, if you want to go back, start to adjust these, go for it. Like I might want to change my spotlight now. Down to 70. Okay. I think we're getting enough light. And then I can go over and do my cove light. Okay. So cove light. All right, so for a cove light, I need a cove. So I have to go back to my layers here. I'm going to create a new layer, call this just my cove. Click on that. Okay. And then I'm going to create a box, just like I did the soffit, but I'll remove one of the faces on top. So we'll go to box, corner, corner. Okay. I can go to my front view so I have a clearer understanding. Maybe I want to stop my live rendering. Yeah. Okay. All right, then I'm going to do the same thing where I'm going to click on the top corner, and then my top view will go back, and now I know I'm working in the same plane. And I'm going to make this much smaller than my soffit. So I'm just going to select this, and then say my height is 6 inches. Okay. My front view here, you can see what that looks like. So it's just this kind of, floating box in my view. All right, so what I'm checking right now is just that it's modeled actually to that, okay, that point. I think you might have to shift this down because that's the roof there. So I think I'm just going to shift this down to apparent intersection. Yeah. And that way I have a clean corner. Okay. And then I'm going to extract the top surface so that, so type in extract surface, select surface to extract. Okay, I'll take top surface, press enter, delete, so that if I look at this, if one were to look at this, the top view, you'd actually see an empty box. Okay, so there's now a void in between my roof surface and that cove light. Okay. All right. So now what I have to do is I have to place some linear light in the space to light up, right? We want that directionality to be up. So I'm going to create a new layer called this rectangle light. We're going to try that first and see how that goes. If that doesn't work like it didn't, like I wasn't enjoying there was a lack of control, I should say, in how long that light was. So I'm guessing we're going to get the same response this time. So we're going to have to kind of fudge around it. And I think I have a solution, but we'll see. So, okay, we're going to go to this lighting. Oh, I'll go to render tools again so you see this. Okay, so we use spotlight, we use point light, skipping this. Now we're going to try out the rectangular light. Select that, we go to rectangular light, we need the light corner. So I'm just going to select the corner of my box, select the light length. It's going to be the length of that box. And turn off that space, it's impossible to see. Okay, see the length of the box. And then I'll select the opposite corner. And notice the default for that is pointing down. Okay, so I'm going to select that light, select this rotation and type in 180. Okay, and that's going to flip that arrow so that it's pointing up against my ceiling. Okay. All right, so that's a rectangular light. Let's see how that looks. We're going to turn on our base, turn on our interior, and then give that a look. All right, so we'll start this again, see what our live updates say. And now you can see how that's a little strange, right? It creates this sort of limited range of light from the light source, but it doesn't necessarily take on the proportions of my light box. So I find that super strange. Even if I start to adjust the width, um, I still get the same central um, control. If we go to properties, I still have the same options as if it were a point source. So to me, that I can adjust the intensity. That makes sense. And now I get that nice little glow in the center. But it seems to me that my cheat is to make this light as long as the light that I'm getting emitted from it, so from that source, and then copy this over, which I think um, it doesn't make much sense because then you're starting to get it's not a nice clean um, line of light. There's like a halo, right? There's that original circle that we saw um, that it's going to look like there's a break in between them, which it could be. I mean, if you see it only to this extent, it's only that bright, it could be fine, right? And you start to kind of merge these together right where those two meet. Um, but as it starts to get a little more intense, it gets a little uh, distracting. It makes it look like there's not a continuous line of light, but just um, that's not bad. You can see what I mean, right? You don't want the merging of the two. You want to have one long line. But it is a workaround to copy and paste this and start to shift these in space. Okay. Try this guy. Okay. So you can see how it's just not continuous. It's too bumpy. So and I think it's because of the arc that's coming out of those. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to try a linear light. So a rectangle light with a directional. It's at least pointing the right direction. Right, the opposite side is black, so I definitely don't want that. But take the linear light approach, and we'll see how that bodes. So turn that off. See, they're off. I'll go up to this next option in the menu. It says Create Linear Light. And this one is, it creates a tube of light. So I'm going to try this instead. I'll take our end and I'll create it. Oh, I need for it to be all in the same plane at least. Okay, it needs a start and end point, and then that's it. Okay, but you can see what happens, right? It says it has a similar thing, right, where it's limited in its length. And I think if we go to our Yeah, our assets don't allow us to, our property assets don't allow us to change that. So and the length doesn't really adjust this, but at least it's linear, it's all along the same line. It doesn't have the arc, and that was the problem. If they're all meeting together and they have the same that arc, you get kind of a bumpy effect. Whereas this, I think you can at least copy and paste in between, and then you can, um, you know, it's a smoother shift in between the two. Okay. All right. So that's my cheat at least for using the linear lights for a cove. Um, it's something, you have to pay attention to like all these little things to make sure it's reading correctly. Um, but I think, I mean, for the most part, it works, and you don't need like super bright light. Just need a little bit, enough to see where those things are overlapping. Okay. And then, so if you're placing those and taking a look at, how these things work, overlap, and such, and the intensity, you can also, if you're in V-Ray, then you have, the same sort of controls, but I think you have UV size, um, which is kind of, I think that's the U size that's helping elongate this. So I think you have a little bit more control in trying to, I noticed how it updated, right? It updated my render and updated here. But I think there are still the similar limits. You might end up having to have the same strategy. If we elongate this, yeah, it still keeps, there's a limit as to how far that goes. And notice it creates a rectangle light anyway, even though this is a pipe light. Um, and that is because if we look at this, you don't have one. So it just creates a rectangle light tool and gives you the same properties as that. Just it's it's fine, it works. But you know, oh sorry, so the U is for the length, but then the V, this is, notice it's changing the sphere of light around that tube. So it's the idea that's a cylinder of light, and it's starting to expand that light from the center. So you can see here it's starting to move away in relation to that new diameter that you're giving it here in the V. Okay, notice it at some point gets way too big, so it's no longer even visible. So we want to keep it around like 0.1. Yeah, 0.1. And then make sure it's in our building. But yeah, so there's a limit there, so we have to kind of play with this and make sure that we have it set somewhere that we can start to copy it and create our cove lighting. Oh, that's why I had shifted it out. Okay, all right. Well, now I'm just going to keep playing. Once you get to something like this, it's just tricksy enough. It's fun, and you kind of want to see how to figure that out. But I think, that's kind of the way to go with that linear light. Um, you know, create the linear light, because then you get this nice continuous line across versus that bumpy rectangular light that we saw, in this option. It's kind of mm, a little warpy. So yeah, that kind of, I think that works better. Okay, so I think I'm going to take a break then. It's 3:50, so let's say 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock we'll reconvene, and then we'll start to work on material mapping. So we'll place some wood and we'll place some brick, and hopefully that'll be enough to get you. Those are kind of the trickiest ones. So once we get those placed, we'll hopefully make it easier for you to get all of the other stuff, which really is is easy once you get that basic mapping down. Okay, so uh, yep, 4 o'clock. Okay, so look at that. You get an extra minute to play. All right, leave this on for you. I think I'm gonna leave. Yeah, I think I'll just leave that on. Okay, we are back. So now we're going to move on to materials. Okay, so materials, we actually kind of already looked at that when we did grass, right? When we were creating the grass in V-Ray, right? We went over here. Let's see, let's bring that up and look at that. Okay, so remember how we had this sort of diffuse that we added a bitmap to? Okay, we clicked on the little map, and we added an image file, and we went and we looked online to find that image file. This is the same process, but I'm going to instead not use V-Ray. I'm going to use uh, the Rhino materials. Okay, so we still need, excuse me, we will still need some JPEG that we're going to have to search for online. Okay, so I have two here. I have brick and I have wood flooring. So both of those I went on to Google and did my of course, due diligence to find a good brick texture and a good wood texture. Um, there are so many, ways to find these things. The way I'm going to show you is one, kind of the old school way where you're finding this bitmap texture on your own and you're building that texture based on some, you know, 2D square image that you find. However, you can also use these websites. There are tons of websites. This one I found, this morning. It was free. I was able to create an account, log in, and then start downloading these. I downloaded the grass. I didn't get to try it yet, but I'm gonna have to take a crack at it. I'm curious what that does for me. But you can see what you get in that package when you download it. So you get the image of what that material renders like. Then you get a grass diffuse. That's the color, right? The texture that we're going to see. And then you get a bump map. Okay, we'll talk about what a bump is, but that's what's going to give it a 3D sort of appearance. So it'll start to use the positive and negative of that black and white image to create a bump, 3D, uh, yeah, 3D texture to it. I don't know how else to explain it. That's what it does. And then you have here the normals and the reflection. So, we're really just going to work with these two, but I can guess that, well, the reflection is going to add reflection to it, and the normal, I think, balances out the coloring. But I've actually never used a normal, so I can't wait. I have to try it. Um, so, that's another way of going about it is just going to one of these libraries that already have pre-made materials, pulling it down, and bringing that into your project. Um, and then, of course, applying that to whatever geometry you're working with. So for me, I wanted to make my floors wood, okay, and my walls brick. So so what I did is I found a wood flooring texture off of Google Images, where I just searched something like wood flooring. See what? Oof, sorry. I always add texture so that you can also add seamless to try to get a seamless texture. There's tons of resources. And then once I found, something that looked like what I wanted. Um, so for me, I wanted a square image, preferably, and, I can Photoshop it too. That's fine if it's a good enough uh, texture. But I also wanted it to have, I didn't want this lap. in the wood. So you can see how these things are starting to lap over themselves. I find that kind of, well, I mean, it's real and it's something to work with, but you can get a really repetitive texture off of that. So it's I kind of prefer not to use that. Of course, you're not seeing the seams of the floorboards, which are going to be there. So that's a discussion point of whether or not it's real. But you probably don't want to pick one of these, with a watermark. So something square, and then with longer, more zoomed out boards. You don't want anything too zoomed in because then it will start to replicate on itself quite easily with the being, so such a small sample of what that floor is. So preferably something larger and covers a wide square area. Yeah, square foot area. There we go. Um, so for mine, my cherry texture, that's what I have here. It's a very small swatch. The texture itself is really just boards, and there's no seam to them. So here, that's my cherry texture. Okay, and what I do is what I did was I used this positive uh, little button here, and I said create new material, and I choose custom. Okay, I can rename this wood flooring redo, I guess we'll call it redo. Um, and these are the custom settings of any material. So if I want, actually works really well if you want to quickly make some faux plastic or even metal. You can start to work with these, or you can create your own metal. Right, you have the metal option here. But these custom settings are pretty powerful. You can create your own glass even by just shifting up your transparency, your gloss finish, your reflectivity, change the color a little bit, right? So it's like glass, and now you have glass. So they're they're just a few sliders, but they're pretty great. So okay, I'm gonna undo everything I just did. Please ignore. You even have your IOR setting. You can start to get some really good clear reflection. So um, in lighting. And so the texture is really what I want to play with today. So we have our color here that is going to act like what we did in here for our grass and V-Ray, right? The diffuse and the, oh, you update when I do that, don't you? That's, okay. All right, so the color is going to act like that diffuse control. So I just click to assign the texture. I can go to the folder where I have that texture, go to materials, select cherry texture, and then that assigns the color to it. Okay, so that's easy enough. We've created our wood flooring. Um, but now we kind of have to see how that plays out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to select the surface that I want to create it on. I'm going to actually shift this over. I'm going to make a duplicate of this. And I'm going to say that this is no longer, yeah, this is no longer has the material from the layer, but is a new layer, a new material, the one we just created. So I'm going to call it wood flooring redo. Okay, so I have to select the object, go to my material, my properties tab, select the material, and then choose what material I want to apply it to. The other way of doing this, and the way that I prefer to do it, I'm just, it, it I'm working a little bit crosswise instead of linear, which is I would typically go in here and if we look at my base files, I would apply these per layer. So I would make sure that all of my walls, right, my walls are on the one layer. So I would just say all of them are that material. Click on that, I assign the material here, and then I say okay. And now I have all of my walls as, say, brick. You can see I've done this a couple times. I did this for the morning class. So I have wood flooring, and then I made one. I had wood paneling originally, and then I made wood flooring for them, and now I've made uh, another wood. So I could actually go in here and I could adjust this. I could call this wood flooring redo. But it's that's just the way of managing your layers. And I really like it because it's very clear then when I open this up and I look at the what the layer is and what the material is, I know immediately what is where. I don't have to select each separate object and then figure out what the heck the material is and how it's mapped and everything. Okay, so um, let's take a look at what this looks like. So this is, and I'm going to turn off I'm going to delete everything and just see. Um, so it's a raw surface. I don't want you to get the wrong impression. It should look in a different way. Okay, so notice here it's like nicely stretched across. That's because it's mapped in a particular way. So if I restart my live updates, we can see that new wood flooring texture I've just created. Okay, let's turn my roof off so I can see the insides and compare the two. Okay, so if we take a look at this, ooh, that is really, all right, so you can see how the mapping really makes a difference. And by mapping, I mean this is the exact same material applied to one floor. Okay, right, I have one floor here that I've just copied and pasted, and I've applied that new material. I also deleted any mapping properties that I had on it, which means it's now the original, right? It's as if I drew a new box over here and I created a new floor. Okay. Um, so to adjust this so that it matches this floor internally, you have to do a couple of things. Um, One thing to do is to, like I said, play with the mapping of it. So let's, we're going to kind of take a look at this. Okay, so let's adjust the mapping. So if we select the surface, and we go to the Properties tab here, and we select not the material, but the button next to it called Texture Mapping, this interface should show up. And what you'll see here is that it's set to surface. Now what surface is doing is it's taking that tiny JPEG that we had, right? This little square of a JPEG, and it's trying to apply that like it's a stamp on a surface. So it's there's no real intelligence to it. It's just saying, bam, this is now wood paneling. Um, so it doesn't really have any other variation to it. It's just one to one. Okay, so if we want to change that, we can look down here, and if we still want to use the surface mapping for it, um, we can go down here and we can change this UVW repeat, which is actually, if we look at this, the top view, this is the same, this could be X, Y, Z. So U is X, phi, and of course this is W in the Z direction. Okay. So if I change my U repeat, so in the X direction here, following the red arrow, and say 10, okay, we'll see that start to apply that texture multiple times across the surface, okay? Um, and I think, right now I don't think it's exactly one-to-one. It's some sort of other approximation because this isn't a square, right? This is a rectangle, so it's stretching it in the furthest distance in this way, but then the rest of it's kind of getting chopped off. So I think we're actually copying it in the wrong direction. So I'm going to change that back, and we'll try this V as 10. Okay, that looks a little bit more like wood flooring. Okay, so um, maybe now is a good way or a good segue to talk about scale of that flooring. Um, so, that swatch that I was using over here, if I estimate each of these boards to be, say, like 4 inches across, I think there's something like I want to say there's 12 boards, but I can't remember. And my right lately my JPEG, even my images don't want to open. I mean, I need a new computer. Or like they're slow. They'll open and they take forever. So yes, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11. Okay. But okay, so if we say that each of these are like 4 inches across, that means that this is about 3 feet. If they're a little wider than 4 inches, then I guess, that won't hurt us at all. In fact, I think if you watch Professor Peluso's tutorials, he'll say that you should try to make your you can make your mapped textures like this, the repeated ones, a little bit larger because it just for the sake of rendering, they'll start to really enhance some of the some of that perspective view that you're setting up. So and it's just also the scale of the space too. So it depends. Play with it, see how that maps. But that's kind of my goal is that it's 3 foot and I'm going to 3 foot wide for that swatch. And I want to then array that so that that approximates, the 20-foot length of my building. Pretty tiny building really for one space. So I think that looks about right. Um, it is starting to get some uh, repetition here, right? Across the length, you can start to see that it wasn't perfectly uniform in its JPEG, you know, in that square texture. But I think, once you get into the space, it might reduce it. Also, we're going to do some color manipulation, so that might help as well. Then the other thing we want to kind of look at, so notice my floor, so this is moving um, horizontally across a space, and mine is actually vertical. I want it, or yeah, vertical, I guess, north-south, right? In plan here, it's that way. So I want it to, I want to flip that, I want to rotate it. So one way to do that is to go to the UVW rotation. I don't know about you, but I always get confused with the rotation. So I end up just trying it a few times and seeing which one works. Um, it's probably an awful thing to tell you as a teacher, but so and it makes sense. Like this makes sense that it's in the Z direction that we want to rotate, right? If you think about it, this W is in the Z. But honestly, I'm every single time I have to rotate, I don't even want to think about it. I just go 90, nope. 90, nope. And I go down the list. But I mean, it makes sense that this one would be um, about the z-axis, and so it rotates that from the x direction to the y direction 90 degrees. Okay, so if we want to reduce this, if it's too much now for that direction, we can start to play with that number, and now it's going to work. Now this is going to be flipped, right? So this is going to be my v, or sorry, this is going to be my u, and this is going to be my v because we've rotated it. Okay. So notice it's a lot richer in color here, right? So that's the other aspect. So let's take a look at that. So I kind of wanted this more desaturated, Nordic looking floor, I guess. Like the IKEA sort of washed out furniture. That was kind of what I was going for this, and then bright everything else, or bold everything else. So for this texture to read paler like that, what we need to do is we need to go under our materials tab, go to the wood flooring that we made, and then we can select this color. It's like that cherry texture. Okay, and I can actually, one thing I wanted to show you is we were talking about this repetition. It does not work with this particular bitmap. I didn't choose a good bitmap, but um, if you have a seamless one, you can if you have a seamless one, you can flip on that mirroring alternating tiles, and quite often, if it is a real seamless texture, it will work. It will map that without any you know repetition lines. So it's a nice little trick to know. But notice, remember I said I have like a harsh line here on the edge, and then this has no harsh line. So what you get is this kind of, if it's mirroring about itself, you get a hard line, like super dark, and then you get this kind of blending, and so you get one huge solid um, central piece. So I can't use that for my condition, but you could. So um, okay, so to change the color, we want to scroll all the way down here and look at output adjustment. And output adjustment really is the color adjustment that we want to pay attention to. And this is going to change the coloring of this bitmap, okay, of this JPEG that we've brought in. So we don't have to go to Photoshop and start to adjust the coloring in that way. We can do it right here in Rhino. So a couple things that we can do, especially for this one, we want to pay attention to like the multiplier and the saturation. So the multiplier is going to make that darker as we shift that down. Okay, so if I want a darker material from what I have here, so say it's a little too bright and seen, I can just turn down this multiplier. And of course, the inverse is true too. We can go over one and we can start to lighten that up if we want it to be brighter. Okay. Um, the other thing then is saturation. So to me, like I said, I wanted that washed out IKEA furniture look. So I was going to take, that saturation down a little bit. So I just take it down a click, see how that looks. Take it down another click, see how that looks. I actually think that's better. Mine is a little too desaturated. Um, but it's a nice, you know, easy way to just change that appearance so it's not overwhelming your scene. And then, you know, you can move on with your life and your materials. Okay, so that's the wood flooring. It's about exactly the same as what I have over here. Um, okay, so the other thing then is the brick, right? The brick that I have here. So you can see how it's if we look at this, there's a kind of roughness to that. Okay, you can see how there's a little bit of indent to there. I can't say it maps these materials super beautifully, but maybe did I turn down my I did, I turned down my quality. That's what I did. So I was testing, I was seeing if it was quicker if I turned down my rendering quality. And I think it is a little bit. It's also supposed to be quicker if your Enscape viewer is small too. So if your Enscape is being kind of slow, you can adjust those settings so that it's a little quicker. Yeah, I'd still say it looks a little bit mappy, but that's okay. I mean, we're not seeing it super close. So, okay. I'm gonna keep that at medium. I like the speed. So, all right, so to create the brick is it's the same thing, right? We're just going to create a new material, custom. I'm going to call this brick redo now. And then like there again, I'm going to go and I'm going to pick some texture that I've already found on Google. Same sort of thing where I was trying to find a square texture. I didn't want it to have too much color variation or changes in contrast, right? I need it to kind of uh, you know blend. Okay, so we're gonna bring that texture in. I'm gonna let it be, and then I'm gonna go into my space over here, and I'm gonna copy that. I'm gonna stop these live updates. I'm going to copy those walls over. Okay, so I'm going to select my walls and just copy them. Okay, so that I have a new from one point to the other. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just using this as some sort of example. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing where I select that, go into my mapping and just say delete mapping. So it's nice and pure again. There's no texture applied. Okay, so I select that, and if you have it on a separate layer, what you'll do is you'll select where's my walls? You'll select the material, right? And then you'll change the material that way. But because I have it on the same layer and I want to give it my new material I just made, I'm going to do it this way, where I select the properties, use material, I'm going to change that to brick redo. And now we'll see what that raw texture looked like, okay? Maybe I should turn off that interior stuff. Okay, and then we'll do live updates true. Yeah, that's what that looks like. It is brick. Technically, that is brick. Um, so this is what we want to avoid, right? Um, we don't want that scale on our building. It makes it look kind of goofy. So what we want to do is we want to change that mapping again. So I need to select that object. So remember, I had all of my walls when I created this building. I created all of them so they're all continuous polysurface. So you might not have the same condition. So maybe you have to do this surface by surface, or you can try selecting them all at the same time and applying the same box, but you might end up with some different U and V um, components because of the directionality. So you might want to do the north-south walls together and then the east and west walls together. But in my instance, I have, it's all the same um, polysurface. So it's all connected, and I did punch openings and I did Boolean difference. So everything's uniform. Makes this a little bit easier to do is all with clean geometry. So if I go to my properties tab and I go to texture mapping, now I have surface applied here, and like I said, it just kind of like stupidly just takes your whatever your bitmap is and just slaps it on that surface, and then it doesn't have any more information. It just says this is the image, that's the surface. Here you go. So I need to adjust that. So one way of doing that is I can we could play with the repeat. I could go down here and I could try to repeat these things, adjust these so that the scale starts to update. And actually, that's not bad. Um, really, that's not a bad. Hmm, I'd be happy with that actually, but I wanted to show you box, so I'm going to change it. Um, I didn't even try it for that first one. I think. Pretty sure I just did. Yeah, I did box. So right. So I guess you can use surface, which makes sense. It's just adjusting the repeat. And also this proves that that's a really good texture. I mean, it's repeating a little bit, but it's nothing, the you can't fix it. You put a little vegetation on there and some stuff inside, and you don't notice it hardly at all. So okay, so I'm gonna undo what I just did. Oop, not point one. Here we go, 1 to 1. So it's 1 to 1, and yeah, that's no good. So I'm gonna change this type. I'm just gonna try box now. And that kind of helps us, right? So it a little bit, right? It takes down, it does the repetition for us, which means it takes the scale of your image and it applies that scale as a direct to as directly to your building as it can. So it starts to create its own repetition in its mapping of itself on that box. So you have to imagine that there's like an imaginary box in here. I tried to show this before too, and it didn't want to show me where the oh, there it is. That's why it was way the heck over there. Yeah. So it's when I apply a box, this is literally what it's doing. It's saying this is the reference box that's as big as the image is, and then if I scale that up, that is a 1 to 1 of how big that image is being mapped. So you have to imagine that there's a bitmap right here on every single side, and that square is being repeated at that scale across the facade here. Okay, so and you can see here this XYZ size, that's what's being updated. So if I want to, I can lock this and I can adjust this on my own and start to adjust that mapping. Okay, and actually that's pretty similar. I think it's even better. I like it's a little tiny, a little bit smaller. This one's a little big for me, I think. But we also, you kind of have to know um, how many wides, how many rows make a certain dimension. So I have to know that, say my this is back to scale again. We take a look at this. Wait for it to open. But you know the rows of brick, each of these is a wide, and we kind of know that I think it's 3 wides is 8 inches. So um, we know that this is what we have 8 here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. So we have 6 times 8, so we have 48 inches. Okay, so 4 feet by 4 feet. Okay, so I wonder if I take this to 4 feet, that's probably, that should be the correct size of my JPEG, right? 4 feet by 4 feet. And then if I map it onto here, that would be correct. Okay, wasn't too off. I did this one a different way, but I think this one, this is much more accurate. Um, so it's mapping pretty appropriately. If I wanted to make that any larger, so like I said, that little trick where we make it tiny little bit larger, I could change that mapping size, say like 4.5 feet, and then that kind of reads a little bit better. Okay, so then the next thing to do once we have that a mapping applied and we have that box there, now we can go back, we can go to the materials, and we can start to look at that brick texture. So notice I have it desaturated here again, a little bit more washed out. So I want to do the same thing here. I could probably mirror it here too. For the brick, I don't think it's the same thing. Um, how's that reading? See, the problem is you start to get these the texture is literally mirroring it. So you start to get these patterns across the facade. And if you have, like, you can see there's various colors of brick. So then when you zoom out, you're starting to see these pretty, I mean, they're cool patterns by all means, but kind of it's like some sort of tribal flower or something in here. It's kind of cool, but I think I prefer it without the mirroring in this. Yeah, I think I can cover that up a little bit better. It's not as strong, right? The mirroring can create a really strong symmetry, and well, symmetry it's really hard to break. So, okay, so then I'm going to go down here and I'm going to desaturate this a couple clicks. Okay, yeah, I think that's better. No, I think I like that one better than I like this one. Um, yep, desaturate a little bit. I could also lighten it. So 1.1. Say it's a lighter brick. Yeah, yeah, I think that's good. Just a little bit toned down. Maybe go a click more, but then you want to be careful of it desaturating too much. But yeah, I think that's good. Okay. So then once we get that coloring for brick, and actually we could do this for the wood too if we wanted a little more that 3D effect I was talking about by adding a bump. Okay, that bump map. So if we look at this texture, we are getting some shading, right? Because of the texture itself, the image. It's creating an appearance of shading, and that's because of it's within the image on its own. Um, this one has a tiny bump to it, but it does kind of enhance it a little bit. Um, so how to do that is we just where are we going? Okay, there we go. Gotta go back a step. So we click on this, and then we can go back to this textures drop down and change that bump so that we can actually select that brick texture again. And using those similar controls where we zoom down, I can now use these color adjustments and invert that and change that to grayscale. And that should allow me. Oh, wait, I think I'm going the wrong way. I wanted the bump to be in the seams. Okay, so I want my image a little lighter so that contrast is there. Okay. All right, so now I've applied that bump texture and should be a little bit more three-dimensional. Okay, not too much, but it's supposed to enhance it a little bit. Okay, and then the other thing we can do is we can add, since we have a little bit more time, I didn't know we had that, that's cool. If we wanted to add any perforations to our image, so if you ever have like a perforated screen or anything,